Thank you for joining us. My name is Barry Erickson, and I'm Community Engagement Coordinator here at Wheaton Public Library. Tonight, we are delighted to bring you another art demonstration in partnership with the DuPage Art League. Founded over 60 years ago, the DuPage Art League is dedicated to promoting and encouraging the visual arts through classes, workshops, gallery exhibits, and public programs such as this one. We are grateful to the DuPage Art League for arranging tonight's demonstration with artist Tony Armendariz. Tony is a contemporary realist artist living and painting in Palatine, Illinois. His work focuses on figurative subjects rendered in watercolor. Graduating from the American Academy of Art in Chicago, he studied under renowned watercolor instructor Irving Shapiro. He has won numerous awards in regional and national competitions and has exhibited his work nationally. Tony is a member of many national artistic societies, including the Illinois Watercolor Society, where he also served as director. So please join me in welcoming Tony.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I can hear my voice. That sounds good. Mic works good. Thanks to everybody who showed up here in person. Thank you to everybody watching out there at home. I believe I do have some friends and family viewing from out of state. And in the future, hopefully soon, my cousins who live down in Nicaragua watching me. So, as a matter of fact, today I'm going to be painting a scene from Nicaragua, which I have been meaning to do for some number of years. My paintings are based on all my travels. So, I thought, well, why not put together a shot for today from one of my travels. Over the years, now, I brought other paintings here with me today, and along with, a lot of stuff that I have that you've seen online, is mostly figurative work, and that's what I've been known for the last 10 years. Before that, it was architectural scenes, a little bit of still life and landscape. I mean, painted that for years, and then I was encouraged to start painting portraits, not just figurative work in my scenes, but actual portraits. And I thought, well, what kind of portraits would I like to do? I need good reference photos. I don't know where to start. And I thought, well, I like to travel, so why not start there? Take tons of pictures and come away with a lot of great scenes and a lot of great people that I meet. And I thought, well, these make perfect subjects for me to paint. So that's what I do now. I teach a little bit with that. I conduct workshops and I get into shows, and I'm able over the years to meet other artists and get inspiration that way. So that's primarily what I'm doing these days. It was a lot more fun than I was a graphic artist for over 20 years, in the corporate world. And I learned a lot there, but once that started, I thought, wow, go back to where I started painting when I was at the American Academy, some 40 years ago. And learning watercolor. And by the way, I know you're going to ask questions, but yes, watercolor is my only medium. Been doing it, like I said, for over 40 years. I haven't done an oil painting since school, so no oil questions. I've attempted a pastel once ever, no pastel questions. I could talk a little bit about my drawing, which I will, and my painting. I'll be talking while I'm painting. Ask questions. Of course, Barry told you about the microphone situation, so I'll make sure I get your questions and answer them as best as I can. Perhaps we'll take a break later. We'll be able to talk a little bit more in depth about any particulars that you might want to know. Outside of the usual, my paints, what paints do I use, the palette, the brushes, all the technical stuff. While I'm painting, I like to talk a little bit more about why I chose a particular subject or what it was that grabbed him about me. Because a lot of students have those questions. What makes something grab your attention? And why don't you paint with models? Why don't you just paint people here in Chicago where you grew up? Well, there's reasons for that. In my travels, if I go I've been down to Cuba many times. I go to Nicaragua. I've been to Europe, and it's just a different experience. And I'm trying to capture the soul and the essence of the people while they're going about their daily lives, while they're working, living. you know, if I work with a model, it's just, it's a different experience. I'm not trying to capture just a person. I'm trying to capture the essence of what that person's all about. So for me, I have to travel and do that and see somebody in their setting, not bring somebody into my setting, you know, like at the studio. I'm not saying that other artists, you know, are wrong for doing that. Everybody has their different reasoning for what they paint, but this is what works for me. And you know, I tell my students, I says, oh, I tell my students, you know, who ask, you know, well, I'm trying to find stuff to paint. I don't know what to paint. I'm like, go from your own experiences. You know, stuff grabs you. Still life artists love doing still lifes. Floral artists love doing florals. I mean, everybody has, you know, there's a calling. It's almost somewhat of a spiritual or even religious experience, really, with art, because you're connecting, and you know, what we're doing as artists is we're enlightening the world about why art is important and why it is what we're doing matters. Because the onus is really, at the end of the day, is on us, the artists, to explain to people why it's so important and why civilization needs it, you know. So that's in a nutshell my philosophy. And what I'm going to do today, and what I'm going to talk about here, why I put this painting up on an easel, because I'm going to paint a similar figure. The figure I'm going to paint today is a gentleman. I took this picture in Nicaragua. He's holding some, candy, candy cane, sugar candy, and he's walking around a park. And so I'm going to show him in a silhouette situation. I'll talk about it more as I paint. And basically, this is how I work. I work from my photos, my own photos. I then prepare a sketch or some type of, well, usually in pencil. Sometimes I paint it. And then I go on to the finished painting. I have this as a reference, because what happens is when you work from photography, your own photography, you might have only a few photos to work from. You don't have, that's the one disadvantage of not having the model to work from. You don't have to, you don't get multiple poses and multiple chances. You might only get a few good shots depending on how you're moving around when you're traveling. So when I get it home, when I'm working on the computer, I then do my compositions. I then transfer it to the paper, to what I've decided on, what I want to compose. And I do a graphite sketch. I brought some of my other graphite sketches in a book that I'll show you later, because that helps me spend time with more detail and understand the values a little bit more. I always say the more preparation you can do for your painting, the better, because you're learning, and that never stops. You might refine your process over the years as you're painting, but you don't stop with the learning process, because you're always teaching yourself and pushing yourself. And the last thing I'll say, again, with my students, who asks, does this get easier, this process? I said, well, the process does, but the process changes. I refine it. And the painting doesn't get easier, it gets harder. It should, because, I'm not painting the same thing over and over and over again. Then it would get easier. It's like, no, I don't want it to get easier. I want it to get harder. So, even recently, I've completed some paintings that didn't make it, that I had to redo, turn the paper over, redo it. Certain things were wrong with it. I mean, you plan, and no guarantees. But that's part of the art process, I think, for all of us. And that's, part of why we love it. We want to make it ours, and we're determined. So, with that, again, with this painting, what I wanted to show, particularly with this painting, is what I've been doing a lot more lately is incorporating white into my work a lot more. Now, I don't paint with white paint, but I use the white of the paper. So what I do is I approach it in two different ways. I use white as a color or as a shape. In other words, the color, sometimes I'll accentuate the highlights or put even more than what the photo shows. Again, I'll be talking about that when I start painting here. And sometimes as a shape, as a relief to the rest of the painting. And in various paintings, I do it to different degrees. There are some paintings where I don't do it a lot. I might employ a more tonal approach. In other words, a more atmospheric approach, a lot more wet onto wet situation. I'll talk about that too. And here in this situation, I used it quite a bit more, along with the normal palette of colors that I use. What's normal? Well, I have a primary palette, I have a secondary palette. I mean, dozens and dozens of colors, you know, a lot of times they don't get used. Sometimes on my paintings, I might use 8 or 9 colors total, but white is a big part of it. Black is not. I'll finish with that. Black is not. I like to mix my colors for my darks. That's my preference. Yeah, back in school they said, well, there's only, you know, there's no black in nature. It's only in space or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of the so-called rules. But once I started developing my palette, my own personal palette more and more, I said, you know, the darks, painting in the shadows are so important. They're so crucial because they give the shadows life. You know, when we're a kid, we're like, okay, all shadows are dark. You know, that's like saying, okay, the skies are blue, trees are brown. We just sort of stick with that. Well, we got to push ourselves away from that. We got to look at that, analyze, and add our own personality to the paintings to make them come alive. And remember, the photo is just that. It's a resource. Because at the end of the day, you know, it's, well, you're using photos or you're tracing or you're using a projector. You know, all these questions come up. People ask. They you know, and at the end of the day, it's your vision. Collectors, fans of art, you know, people who are looking at your work, all they care about really is what's the finished work that's hanging on the wall, be it your wall or their wall. You know, the background, how it's done. Some people are interested in that. But at the end of the day, all these paintings I do are my vision from start to finish. And there's a reason why I'm painting that person and how I'm painting that person. So, you know, keep that in mind. And I think that's it. We'll get started.
Should we do the slides?
Yes, we can do the slides because this moves into more of what I'm painting.
Yeah, it'll take just a moment for us to screen share those, but they'll be up on the screen.
Okay. Okay. Here's Bracelet Man. This again shows a little bit more of not only a little bit of a tonal approach, but there are some strong colors, a lot of skin tone variation, just a silhouette was sort of what I'm going to paint today. In other words, no strong background. And also whites were important on him. This is sort of when I started doing it a lot more, not having to fill every inch of paper with paint. Because that's the problem. Sometimes people see white and they think, oh, it looks unfinished. So you gotta fight that a little bit, and you gotta work it in your composition. But Bracelet Man, I had him. I traveled around with him a little bit earlier this year. Somebody got him, and somebody else is enjoying him now, which is pretty cool. It was about a 20 by 28 painting. So he was part of a series, Gentleman in Cuba, real nice man. Yeah. Okay, this was almost a very emotional painting. Not very big, about a 14 by 18, I think. And it's called Feeding Nairobi. It was a picture I took in Kenya a few years back, driving around the streets of Nairobi. It was really incredible. It's just a busy, incredible mess. Makes New York look like a Sunday picnic. It really is amazing. And here was this gentleman just walking with this giant wheelbarrow, you know, extra added to it, and trying to, you know, doing his living. And it was another one of those situations where I thought, wow, I was sitting in the car, took a bunch of pictures, got home, and I saw this wonderful silhouette. I thought, well, I don't need a background. Look, you know, everything you need to know is right there. And when I got his image onto the computer, I just saw the expression on his face. Because, you know, you're working with a camera and you got the small, you know, screen there. You might not see what really grabs you is when you get home and you look at it on the computer, you get to spend more time with your photos. And I thought, oh yeah, all about his expression, his detail, the details on the cart, on him, And you know, that was really special. I haven't done too many like that, but it worked really well. And Jose, Jose was another man I met in Cuba recently, a couple of years ago. So that painting is about 12 inches wide by about 37 high. And this painting was a master class in what I call negative painting. In other words, you're painting around the object. So this was a rare instance where I actually started with a small paintbrush and worked my way up. I didn't block in. I started small in the hair in the light areas and worked my way up from that. I thought when I did this painting, when I started the painting, I said, oh, I got the face. I can handle that. But how am I going to do this hair? This is my third attempt on that painting. The first two paintings were total failures. Why? Because I had committed on the hair as the way I wanted it. And so, you know, I changed the composition a little bit, and you know, I thought, okay, he's got the look, he's got everything else, he's got color, um, and sometimes you're just like, man, I'm just going to have to spend a ridiculous amount of time on this, and you're going to have to trust the process. You're going to have to realize that you've spent so many years doing this. Just trust how this works, and watch when you start veering off, and you know. But you know, again, like I said, best laid plans. Here I was, you know, after all these years. I painted him a couple years ago, and it took 3 attempts, but I said, I'm making it happen. And he was such a nice guy. I ran into him in the park in Havana, talked to him for a while, and you know, he was very, you know, he very intelligent man. Talked to anything. I offered to buy him lunch. He said, no, that's all right. You know, and the sad thing is a lot of these people I never see again. You know, I don't get email addresses. I don't get nothing. You know, sometimes I go back and I even take prints with me and say, oh, I might see them again. And I can, you know, but I never do. It's just a rare thing. So take as many pictures as I can. You never know. You never know. I use, besides my phone, I actually have a Nikon, was a DC 7500. So it's a real nice high-end digital camera that I've been using for several years now. Really like that. For about 20 years, I used the old, I remember when I first went to Cuba in 2000, I had my old Canon AE1. So that was like, okay, how much film am I going to take? Because that's all I got, you know? Oh man, well, I mean, my father was a photographer, and he would always tell me to take extra shots and do this and that. I'm like, how many rolls of film can I bring? I mean, I gotta get lucky here and set this up. And I usually would do pretty good with it, but now with, you know, digital, no reason to miss out. You know, the only thing you got to do is like when I went to Africa, or you know, when I'm out of country, I make sure to take 2 SIM cards to go into my camera, because if one gets corrupt, at least you have backup for some other stuff. So there is the digital corruption problem, which can happen, but you know, there's no perfect here. And a lot of times I use my phone as just a backup, just in case. But you know, nothing like having a good high quality digital camera for taking these shots. Okay, another negative painting class here. This was he's called The Liar Returns, and he was the second of 2 paintings I did of him. I call him the liar. He was actually just a gentleman in Cuba. He appeared on a travel magazine, and so he decided to use that as his, you know, as his calling card to get people to take their picture with him in front of a well-known restaurant. But I took these pictures of him, and he reminded me of a poet. He had this black cap on and this beautiful beard, real quiet guy. And so the first painting I did was called the Liar and the Truth. You know, there's an old saying that says, you know, a poet is a liar who speaks the truth, his truth. You know, it might not be somebody else's truth, but it's his truth, and and I thought, wow, that fits him perfect. So this was again mid-tones, darker skin tones, a lot of lights, a lot of strong highlights, but some wet onto wet. In other words, softness in the beard. You know, I didn't want that all the same. It dominates so much of the picture. So it was a combination of strong contrasts and some light, almost high key down here. And then again, using the white in the corner as a shape for relief against everything else that was going on. Not a huge painting, but still, I felt I had to do that. Oh, yes, Luis. Luis is another gentleman I met in Cuba. He was a travel guide, half Cuban, half Jamaican. Really, really nice guy. You know, I ran into him and he let me take his picture. And then I got the side profile of him because, you know, looking at him from the front, I thought that's what I wanted. But again, you get home, you know, you step away for a while, you know, you're traveling around. You look at your pictures and you see stuff you hadn't thought you'd seen before. And I thought, well, the side profile was beautiful with his hair, the colored cap, the beautiful red shirt that he was wearing. And again, it's like there's no need for a background, real background, abstract all the way. You caught a little bit of the gaze in his eye. And you know, once again, a lot of negative painting in the hair. That's how I work that. But he was a lot of fun to work with, a lot of fun. About a 14 by 25 inch painting, I believe. So think, oh yeah, okay, Mr. Stripes. Um, he was a gentleman. You know, sometimes I don't get a name from these folks. This man, I think he was a homeless gentleman, and I was, you know, sitting in the park, and he walked by and he started waving and talking. You know, realized I was, you know, American, so I said, you know, can I take your picture? And I could barely understand him. He had such a soft voice, and of course, he starts dancing around, you know, USA, USA. I'm like, no, don't do that. I could get that at home, please. I said, be yourself. I'm not here. Pretend I'm not here. So he gave me the old Andrew Wyeth side pose. I'm like, yes, thank you. Oh, you're wonderful. And oh boy, he again, nice gentleman. I wound up buying him some lunch. I mean, what else can I do? And you know, again, sometimes I just don't get a name, but a lot of soft tones and textures in him, his cap, his clothes, his face. There was just so much weathering on there, and I thought, well, what should I do for a background? And I was almost worried I was going to make it too busy back there. You know, you start thinking and overthinking and overthinking. And it's like just get it done. Just do it. Put all the detail. You know, create your soft edges, your hard edges. You know, you know, differentiate from the photo how much you can, and just make it your own. I had pictures of him looking directly at me, and it just didn't work. You know, I thought with the shadows, and I thought it'd be really cool, but the 3/4 side profile was like that just worked. Good composition. And okay, um, pushcart man pretty much says it. He was a gentleman walking along the alleys and selling well, he was collecting his stuff. I don't think he was selling anything. That was all personal items he had. He was walking around. And I thought he made a great silhouette. Again, background just abstract, wet onto wet, very soft. Contrast with the color in him. Not actually a ton of detail in the face. A lot of times in the face, when you're doing figurative, you know, we think we have to explain everything. And there's a lot of times where you know, as the artist, you know, you gotta trust that people are gonna be pulled into certain aspects of a painting where you might have a detail in an unexpected area. So I made the cart that, but him with the color and just his side glance and a big cast shadow worked really well for me as a horizontal piece. Yeah, I have that over here actually. But he was, again, he allowed me to take his picture. I couldn't tell you what the sound of his voice like. I don't know. I keep running into people that just whisper a lot, and I think I don't know what it is. I mean, Jose, I could talk to him all day. He was like a man of letters. I mean, he was just a very intelligent man, and I thought, wow, man, I could sit down in a restaurant and talk to this guy all day about anything. But that was rare. That was rare. So, and oh, okay. Um, this was in Nicaragua. I call, you know, the watermelon lady. She was, basically walking around the square in Leon, which is a small town in Nicaragua. And it was near the end of the day, and I was ready to go home. And my cousin said, "No, you gotta take her picture. Look at that." And she's walking around normal with this on her head. I mean, it was huge. And so I walked up to her and I said, "Hey, can I take your picture?" And she was just insistent on selling me a slice. She's like, "You want?" I'm like, "No, I just want to take your picture." It's like, "Why?" She's like, just look at me like, well, "Why? What? Why would you want my?" I'm like, "Please." I gave her a couple bucks. No, I don't want a slice. I really don't. But I've never seen that. I'm like, I'm gonna go home. I'm not gonna see that. Are you kidding me? Come on. So that was just a lot of fun. That was just me. At the end of the day, I caught her again, a lot more whites than what was actually there. She just had this wonderful profile, a little bit of a smile, and she was probably laughing at me, but I got her to smile, and that was just a fun portrait. I enjoyed doing an unusual composition. So yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, touch of red. Um, Another woman walking through Parque Central in Havana. She had a green shirt on, a green top. I wanted to match her hair more, and I wanted the color to really be just in her face and in the flower, and just an abstract background. And with that profile, I mean, she was about so tall, not very, small woman, diminutive, and just had the wonderful features. She was eating some ice cream or something, and then when I saw her and I saw how she did her hair and turned it up and had all the little details, and I thought, okay, in her clothing, all that it mattered was her collar. Nothing else mattered, and that is about a 20 by 20, 20 by no, it's an 18 by 24 painting, and I still have it. It's wonderful. When I did it, I knew I do. This is what I want to do more of, this kind of stuff. This was done a few years ago, and it was one of the first real successful like side portraits like that I did, where I was using more whites, I was using more abstract backgrounds. I really started feeling comfortable with it, so I was real happy with her. Which, by the way, there might be one of the few paintings I have that I would hang in my house upstairs. We have friends and family, especially friends that come over and visit, and they're like, "Oh, where are your paintings? Are these your paintings?" I go, "No. My wife and I, we travel and we collect paintings and from friends or from places we visit, and we hang that up. I have movie posters, all kinds of stuff." "Tony, where are your paintings? Where are your stuff?" "That's downstairs in my studio." I can't look at my own work for the most part a long period of time. I'm sitting there watching the Cubs game or something, and there's my painting. My OCD. I just want to, no, I got to fix that. I'm going to take the back off, and I just can't. I can't do it. I go to visit other friends, other artists that I know, and their house is filled with their work, and I'm just like, man, how do you do this? I, I, I don't have enough of my work that I enjoy that much. This is one of the few ones. One of the few ones that, I look at and I look at and I go, no, there's nothing to change on her, really. There's stuff I could change because there's that part of my brain that says, oh, no, no, come on. Really, what would you change? I'm like, no, these internal struggles we have as artists, that's just it. But she was a rare one for me. That if I had to hang up something in the living room, I'd probably hang her. And Petra. Jose, I was telling you about the negative painting and the hair. This one was even more difficult. I mean, it almost broke me because this is about 23 by 20 in size. She's a relative of my wife's, a little 4-year-old girl, and the sunlight hitting her hair was just magical, and the shadows. But I had multiple challenges. One was truly convincing myself that I could paint this because it was like, wow, there's so much going on. There's the softness of the face. She's a little kid. How do I do shadows on a little kid without making her look bruised? There's the sunlight hitting her hair. There's warm tones along with cool tones. There's a lot of hard edges, and then there's soft edges on the side. So it was the ultimate planning and timing and back and forth and back and forth. I painted her last year. I got halfway done, and I actually had to just put it to the side for a while because I was really fidgety about what direction to go, and I was getting into the face. stuff like the eyes and the features, I felt confident about, but man, just these drop shadows and the reflections, the tones, the subtlety. Um, I got to a point where it's like, I don't know if I like this. I mean, it's so different. That's what happens. And I put it aside. I worked on a couple other projects, and I finally started, I kind of put it off to the side where I couldn't see it, like when I was sitting in my studio. So I had to get up and walk over to another part of my studio to see it and turn the light on and kind of stand there and go, okay, okay, and then walk away again. And then a couple months later, I picked it back up, and suddenly I felt like I had a rush of adrenaline, like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. And I finished the hair. I started here, went all the way around, and the final test, when my wife looked at it, and she's just like, oh, I knew that first half second when she looks at it, because she doesn't have an artist, but she's like everybody else, non-artist. I know instantly if she likes it or not. She didn't stand back and can go, like, okay, say no more. But when she, saw this, because she didn't see it for a while, while I was working on it, and she finally saw a close to almost finished product, she was like, well, that's just, that's just further than anything I've ever pushed before. So that'll go through some shows for a couple of years, and then to the family, I said I'd offer to give it to the family. Family said, wait a minute, you could make some serious money off this. Go ahead, man. Like, okay, I got your approval to sell it if I have to, but I'm gonna show this to as many people as I can. So that kind of brings me to where I am now. This was pretty recent. I'm not doing paintings like this certainly all the time. Even paintings here are much simpler. But it was just it was like, I got to do it. That tousled hair, that warm and cool contrast along with the face, I couldn't pass it up. So, and I knew it was going to be tough, but I did a preliminary sketch. I did an intermediate painting, a smaller painting with that. You know, I was really channeling my old school days of preparation. The only thing I didn't do was any magic marker sketches. I mean, we used to do those too, and drive us crazy. Trying to figure out value and composition. But so let's see, she's in Pennsylvania right now at a show. So after that, we'll see. We'll see. I think that wraps it up, Barry. Oh, okay. Finally, Mr. O. Again, I didn't get a name. This, a lot of white on him. I was walking around a small fishing village in Nicaragua, saw him. He was sitting in the shadows, kind of like a retired fisherman, I guess, because it was a fishing village. And I said, oh, interesting, but no, he's sitting in the shadows there. I don't want to bother him. Took some other pictures, got ready to leave, and he had moved out into the sunlight. My cousin, who was with me, said, hey, how about this guy? That's what you want. The sun was hitting his whole backside, and it was just gorgeous. And I walked up to him. I say, hey, can I take your picture? And he just kind of nodded and grunted at me. And I said, I'll take that as a yes. So I took some shots. I said, muchas gracias. ¿Cómo se llama? What's your name? I got right in front of him, and my cousin was breathing down my neck, hunched like this. And he goes, I'll ask you a second time. ¿Cómo? Oh, man, what? I'm not going to ask a third time. So my cousin and I walked away. I said, I heard an O name, maybe something like Orestes or something like that. I heard an O name. He heard something totally different. I said, you're right next to me. How could you? I didn't hear nothing. So I said, okay, he's Mr. O. That's the best I can do. He's Mr. O. And again, I took his pictures and he just glanced to the side for a second like that. And I was just like, wow, that's, I can't set that up in a studio situation. That's just, he gave me that off the center look. And so that's what I want to capture. That's the essence I want to capture in him. Make the shadows even darker in his face. His shirt comes down to a lot more shadows, which I'm going to talk about in just a second here. I'm ready to paint. And that had an abstract kind of background, but the background is actually a brick wall, and there was a door over here, and I just concentrated on the colors, and I thought, well, it's an interesting color combination. I don't use strong greens like that, along with purples and blues. But, yeah, why not? I don't have to use complementary colors every time, do I? So, and a brown hat, it's like, well, if his hat has any stuff on it, which I've done before, a lot of these guys are wearing caps. I don't want the logos. They're too distracting for me. With all the folds and the way people wear them and stuff, I said that's plenty. I want the eyes. I want the soul there. So with that, I think we're good, Barry. And
Unless you want to talk about the reference photo for just a moment, that's our last slide.
okay, here we go. Yeah, Cotton Candy, the Candy Man. He was just walking around, took some shots, some more long distance shots, but I really enjoyed this composition because, where he's looking, he's walking one way, looking the other, and holding this, this wonderful, bounty of sugar color, and, for the kids. And I thought, okay, well, this is nice because it's got unique colors. It's a nice composition. The background, again, doesn't matter. I'm going to leave that out. I'm going to make it dark to support him. There's going to be a combination of wet onto wet and wet onto dry techniques, which I'll be talking about, that I can use to show the luminosity and transparency of the candy. So, and some wonderful, shadow work here. I might make some things a little darker than what you see in the photo. Yes, I might go off script a little bit. We'll see how it goes. Usually in these situations, I just say everything's intentional, and the so-called happy accidents, right? So that's pretty much with him. There's just enough action. There's enough shadow and light. I'll pump up the highlights a little bit more, show a little more white where I need to show them, and I think that's about it. And I think we're ready to go. All right. Any questions before I paint? No? Good. I like it that way. All right. So, now, oh gosh. Yes. No.
So the question was about the hair on the little girl.
Yes, the hair on the little girl. Petra. Excuse me. Negative painting. I painted around each strand of hair because most of the hair is either white or yellow from the sunlight, and on the side of the face it was cool, from the blue background. Excuse me. So what I had to do, with her was, okay, where do I start, and how far do I want to go? And then when I get into the face, how do I blend that? That was when I, because I was halfway into it, that's when I started to, start coming to a screeching halt, like, oh gosh, where does the hair end? Where does the face begin? That kind of stuff. But a third of the way into it, not even a quarter of the way into it, I was like, well, I'm painting all these strands of hair, or around all these strands of hair. I guess I'm going to have to do the whole painting like this. There's no way of faking it and going, well, this is mostly just abstract anyway, and I'll just suggest it. I was just like, no, it's too important. So using a smaller brush, basically number 6 brush, or a small, not a big brush, but it was a lot of back and forth because I wasn't sure how dark to make some stuff and where I needed soft edges in certain cases. Because if I did it the same way all the way around, it would have looked like I used an X-Acto knife and cut the whole thing out. It wouldn't look natural, not natural enough. I only used a little bit of masking fluid on that, right on the side of the face, where the shadows were the strongest, by the ear and the temple. But everything else around the front of the face, the back, that was all, there was no masking fluid. I didn't want that, and I don't use masking fluid a lot because it creates a harsh edge, and then all the edges will be the same. I want the chance to change that where I want that, to soften up some areas if I want. it means I have to spend a lot more time working on it, but that's okay. But there are instances where I do have to use it. So yeah, sometimes I'll use the masking fluid for just little bits here and there, but I try to rely on that as less as possible. So, all right, okay. So I have my reference here. I have a sketch here, which helps remind me of values. Sometimes with my reference photos, I could print this out in black and white, which, is a quick, reference. But I like doing the sketch, writing some notes on it as I have to help remind myself of certain points that I might forget about later, about where I want the contrasts and where I want the wet on to wet be, or certain other approaches. Um, these sketches can be very, very loose and quick. It's just like working in your notebook. They're just ways you don't remember everything. You forget sometimes, and it's nice to have these visual aids along with any additional notes that you write. Put my eyes on. There we go. See what I'm doing. So I have my water set up. I have my water in my water, clean water, dirty water, sponge, porcelain palette. Um, all my colors, I might not use them, all of them, doesn't matter. I got about 20 colors here on what I call my primary palette, colors that I use the most, warms the cools that I want to go to immediately. And I have maybe another 100 colors or so just sitting on shelves, and just, multiple brands, I come across. And uh, the brands, I mean, some are very specific why I have certain brands. Some are single pigment paints, others, the saturation's better on them. It's how they mix. Most artists I know use like several different brands. They just do. So, okay, so approach here. Where to start? Where to start? Well, do you go light to dark? Do you go background to foreground? Well, kind of. But there are times when, like this, I go, well, I'm going to have the cotton candy be very light. The background's going to be very dark. But I think what I want to do is hit some of the light spots. And by the way, I move around a lot when I paint. In other words, I don't approach it like an illustrator. I used to do illustration where I would finish one area and then move on. Because what happens is if I do that, I'm judging that area off of the rest of the painting, which is just white and has some pencil lines. So I jump around on the painting a lot. I mean, I might, in a situation where I'm doing a portrait, I might, if it's a large portrait, I might go, you know what, that ear is very well defined. And I'll paint the whole ear, to a finish, to be like, well, I can use this as a reference point for everything else. But generally, I mean, that's kind of rare. If I'm painting stuff that includes the background, I'm going to start with the cotton candy. I'm going to start with wet onto wet, which is wetting the paper first and then dropping color into that. So I have some nice softness, a glow. That's what some of this cotton candy has the strong sunlight. I want to retain that. That's something I try to, be mindful of. And then by the time that dries, I can move on to another part. Well, while that's drying, I should say, I can move on to another part. And then by the time I'm ready to do the background, that's dry enough, and it won't affect what I've already painted down here. I do carry a hair dryer with me. I don't use it that much. I like the paint to move around in the water on at its own speed. The hair dryer sometimes impedes that, stops that process. Part of why we love watercolor, because of how it moves around in the water. Yes, it's less control, but we accept that, right? So I pre-wet my paints that I know that I'm going to use. On my palette, I have some paints from, that have been sitting there in the wells. I just reconstitute them with a little bit of water, and they come to life. And then with certain colors that I know I'm going to use a lot of, I pour out some fresh. Usually when you start a painting, you are going to use some fresh paint. Don't do a painting with just old paint, because you're going to be using like those little cakes, those little pans. You're going to be spending a lot of time reconstituting. I mean, if you're doing big areas, you're losing valuable time. Seriously, when you do like wet on wet painting, you only have like a couple minutes of a window to really drop in those nice fresh colors before things start drying on you, when the water evaporates. And then you've got, runbacks and blooms and all these other things that happen. They have absolutely zero control over. So, that's again why we love watercolor, right? Yeah. Let's go here. It's wet. Use my clean water. I'm going to start with the pink. That's not very clean, is it? Fortunately, there was a little yellow on that brush that I can easily incorporate into the pink. That's okay. Do I start with a round brush or a flat brush? Flat brush covers more areas, but again, it just depends on the instance. These so-called rules. There's a lot I do that the same way, but you got to be ready to change it up. You got to be, thinking of what's overlapping what. Do you want to get hard stuff out of the way? Do you want to paint all the hair first and then move on to something that's easy? It depends on several factors. How one object relates to another, because you're dealing so much with timing. It's not like acrylic or oil where you can go dark and then light and then just keep going and going without it affecting the rest of your painting. With watercolor, everything is affected, and timing is so crucial. That's why I say it's the hardest medium. People don't believe me, but it is. All my oil painting friends don't go near it because it's so difficult. I said, well, wait a second. If it's so difficult, how come we don't get as much money as you guys for? Well, you don't spend as much time on it. Oh, really? That's the thing. All that time we do spend on it might be less time, but a lot more action. A lot more crucial time. Okay, so it's wet. The bags that have the pink are wet. I will use a separate brush. I've got, I brought out some Opera Rose. Nice strong color. Start dropping them in the dark areas and then have it move out into lighter areas. And what I mean by dropping is just as you see my brush, really dropping in the paints, as opposed to like using a mop application where I'm really brushing it in there real strong. I don't want to do that. This way I'm having soft edges. It's still a variation of edges, because even though you put the water down on the paper and the fibers of the paper are sucking that water up, it's doing it. I don't care what brand of paper you have, it might be in a somewhat uneven way. Something else that drives watercolors kind of mad, that lack of control with how your paper is accepting the paint into the water. This also, well, the idea is that it allows me not to overpaint. I'm working with just the paint coming off the tip of the brush where it almost does like a starburst effect. Okay, a lot too strong here. And usually I paint either flat or on a very slight tilt. I sit down more and more these days when I paint. I guess I like to be comfortable, but I do have a larger table, and sometimes I spin it around and I'm moving about it. Sometimes I stand up. Okay. put water here. There we go. Sometimes I might have some areas where there are some hard edges. It's okay.
On the bottom left,
Like that?
yeah.
There we go. Yeah. Sometimes I'll have a piece of tissue over here because now I'm going to smear my drawing, so I gotta watch that, right? And everybody wants to see the palette, and then it's like, I got the palette, I got the picture, I got the painting, the top of my head. You know, you get everything here. You get everything here. So, okay. You know, if I miss a few areas, I can re-wet, I can come back. You know, just as long as I don't get carried away with the coverage here. Again, I'm not, you know, thinking, oh, I'm going to paint this to completion here. It's like, no, I'm almost, it's almost a form of blocking in. I'm getting the crucial colors into the areas that I need to get them. This is what's known as indirect painting, as opposed to direct painting. Indirect meaning I do a lot more layering, back and forth, layers, dry, putting on multiple layers. Then the idea is that it's still transparent. In other words, light passes through the paint, the different layers, hits the paper, you know, comes through the water and comes back out. And you see, you know, until you could, I mean, paint enough to where it's opaque. You certainly could do that. But I try it where I'm using multiple layers of colors and values, but yet to maintain that transparency, that feel that you're looking through something. That's the hope. Right, Dan? That's the hope. That's the hope. Okay. And also something else, a warning about photos. The photos, they mix lies with the truth. They give us too much information. We don't see like that. When do you ever look around and everything's into focus? I mean, that's crazy. So you gotta watch. You gotta watch that. Hard edges and soft edges. You gotta watch what they call atmospheric perspective, how things change as they go off into the distance, how things get softer, how colors neutralize, how they change. You know, the photos are great because they give us all this information, but don't stay married to the photo. Be careful. That's, you know, because then you're a slave to the photo, really. I mean, that's even if, you know, like I said, if it's your own photo, you wanna change things up. Okay. Okay, so that gets most of the pink down now. I'm gonna let some of that dry, and I'm gonna actually jump right onto the shirt. And the shirt, I like for a couple of reasons. I see cool yellows and warm yellows. Warm yellows in the shadows, cool yellows on the highlights. And I'm going to accentuate those even more with some white. So to do that, I will paint wet onto dry. In other words, I could bring the brush and kind of move it around. This is sort of a cold pressed paper, 140 pound, for those of you who are, you know, that want the specs. I paint on 300 pound for my finished paintings. I like they stay flat a little bit more. They accept more paint and water, so you have to use more paint and water because the fibers of the paper suck that all in. With 140 pound, you can get more vibrant color and you can paint a little faster. You're not using as much maybe, except now you're getting all this buckling. That's why we love watercolor. It just throws this stuff at us. So let's see here. I have a couple friends that paint on easel, paint straight up, and I've tried that, and I was like, I'll go to oil painting if I have to do that because all of a sudden I got water just flying around, and I was just like, no, I don't know how, no. So, I've got, let's see, we'll go to the cadmium yellow, deep hue, and a pale yellow as my cool yellow. You didn't see me put the tube in my teeth. But you will not see me put the brush in my mouth. I know artists who do that, and they just, I'm like, no, 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 not happening. All right, I'm going to start with the cool yellow because that's going to help establish my whites and then blend in the warmer yellow along with, oh, I don't know, maybe a purple or something to help darken that. Um, and again, not a lot of water. You know, if I paint my towel, I don't see much. I think I'm ready to go here. I'm going to go to my cool yellow. So my brush is damp. It's not charged with water. We call a brush that has a lot of water and a lot of paint on it charged. It's ready to go with a lot. I want more pigment to water ratio, I guess, at this point, because I can paint and apply the paint in different ways, moving the brush around, that will allow me to preserve the whites that I hope to keep. So, and I'll use the tip of the brush to go into the crevices, into the shadow areas. That's the plan. Let's see how we can stick to this plan. Let's give this a shot here. And yes, I'm always squinting back and forth. You know, your teacher tells you to squint because you're weeding out the details, the light coming into your eyes, and you can see those contrasts much more and the shapes better. So, you know, it's oh, but gee, Tony, you know, you see the pencil lines. Do you erase those or do you paint over those? Well, for the most part, when I'm doing my drawing, I use what's called an F pencil, which is sort of it's a little hard, you know, it's a graphite pencil. It doesn't smear. It's not like an HB, which is like the old #2 pencil, and it's not real fine like an H or a 2H pencil, where it kind of cuts into the paper. Um, you know, more tech talk here. An F pencil is easy to erase, but it holds its own. While I paint several layers, I can still see it as a guide. After I do like 2 layers, I kind of know where I'm going, and if I lose pencil line, I can fill it in. Only in the face am I even more careful about that, because a lot of times when I'm doing the face, you have you have all these subtle shadows creeping across, you know, various features of the face, especially like under the eyes, where you might see some lines in the eyes, but they're only going just a little bit. So you lightly draw them in, and then you go in with a couple layers of paint, and they disappear. Um, so I'm very, very careful about that. Just a little bit of water here. I get brush on the side of the brush. This is also known as a scumbling technique, where you're dragging the side of the brush over the tooth of the paper, creating the various textures. Okay. I look at the darker areas and I sort of fill some of that in. Be ready to move on to my warmer yellow pretty soon here. And the other benefit of the way I paint, where I might be leaving a lot of whites, if those whites offend me later on, I could just paint over them. If you paint over them too soon, you ain't getting them back. I don't care how much scrubbing you do. I don't care how much Mr. Clean brushes you're using, because what those are, the problem with the Mr. Clean brushes is not only whatever, if you're using a knockoff one, those things are terrible. You got to use the real Mr. Clean brush. But it's like an industrial vacuum cleaner. It's actually rubbing out the fibers in the paper. It's not just lifting the paint, it's taking out the fibers in the paper. So you better like that highlight, because no way, no day you're painting over that again. That's how it goes. So a great tool, but can quickly ruin a painting. All right. All right, I think I have a lot of the yellow where I want it. The cool yellow, the highlight yellow. And I'm going to go right into, again, using use the back of your finger to touch the paper because it's the most sensitive part of your hand. And, you could almost not touch the paper and still feel the coolness on your finger of the water and know that it's in that damp area where it's like, well, I can't really paint on that again because I'll get semi-hard edges and then I'll get some blooms still kind of. You want it to be pretty dry to the touch. So I'm gonna let that go for, I mean, this forces me to jump around the painting. So, now I'll use a little bit more water and I'll be painting wet on to dry, but a little more wet. Again, this is I believe it's a number 12 brush, round brush, giving me all the coverage that I need for the painting this size. All right. And since I'm doing an abstract approach to the background, this is, oh gee, I paint outside the lines. You're fine because you're going to paint dark over that. So don't get too bent on that type of thing. Here we go. All right, blocking this in. Pretty good. Strong. Put some water on it. Let me get over his shoulder here. All right. Okay. Got, I want it. Great. Let's grab some purple. Now it's complementary time. Imperial purple. Very strong, very rich, very saturated. Dioxazine is also another purple. Difference being one is single pigment, others double pigment. They use two pigments to make certain colors. Certain colors are made with single pigments, giving you supposedly more predictable results. Some people are really sticklers for that. A lot of other artists could care less. Well, how much of the science do you need, right? Remember, the purple is dropping onto the yellow here and kind of coming up with this sort of neutralish dark. It depends on how much I'm using. But now I can sort of follow along some of the pencil lines that I have here for the creases, right? And I have a good tip on the brush that gives me those.
Excuse me, Tony, would you mind going over again what you mean by direct versus indirect painting?
Yes, direct painting. Plenty of painters out there who do this all in one motion, essentially one layer. Very, 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 very quick, very loose. Sometimes they can be pretty tight, but indirect is just more of painting like I do, layer of color, letting it dry, going on with another layer, a wash, a glaze, as they're called. And that's basically it.
And someone else is asking,
Yes.
the pound of the paper, was it 300?
This is 140-pound paper that I'm painting on. You can tell right away because it's a little thinner and I got all the buckling that's happening here. It's cold press, so it has a little tooth to it.
And do you treat it beforehand?
I do not. I used to treat it, I used to, oh my gosh, I would, because paper comes, watercolor paper, as I'm moving along here. Um, and sometimes I see a little bit of, uh, stuff's not, I'm getting some semi-hard edges here, so I got to work those. I got to be careful. Um, I used to, watercolored paper comes with external and internal sizing. It's like a gelatin that helps absorb the paint. And what you do back, what we did in school was to to soak our papers like in a tub and bring some of that out, and therefore you'd get a much more even wash. And as the years went by, it's just like, wow, that's a lot of work. You're getting rid of the sizing. You're brushing it off with a sponge. Some artists, what they'll do is they'll wet one side of the paper and turn it over and put it onto a surface and and then just paint and let it dry that way. There's different approaches to working with that. But then when my paper was wet, what I would do was I would then staple it using large, um, like popsicle sticks, uh, to a fiberboard, that they make cabinets with. I had a big piece of fiberboard, and I would put the paper on there, wet, use it like an industrial stapler, and staple these things around it. And then when it dried, it was tight as a drum. It's like, well, that. And then as I started painting more and more without it, I would just tape the paper, and I'd be like, it's 300-pound paper. It's not going to buckle that much on me, and I'm getting the washes that I want. I wasn't having any trouble, so uh, I don't prepare it anymore. I just personal preference. Um, I use a pretty high grade paper to paint on. I'm also going to paint in some shadow area here, in the cool area. What I can do too, take the old squirt bottle, and what that does is that gives me a kind of, if I squirt lightly, the dots hit some of the wet parts, spreads out some of the edges a little bit more. Right. Okay, I'll just hit a couple more darker shadows a little bit before I move on. Okay, okay. And this large area that I'm painting, again, it's, I can come back later. I still have enough pencil line showing. What's going to happen is once I paint in the rest of the cotton candy in his face, there might be, I might decide, well, it needs more help. Okay, so I'm just about done here. I want to move on. Okay. I'm going to leave that for now. And what I want to do is, since the arms really aren't touching anything, I'm going to go into the arms and the face. So here is where it's going to be a combination of light to dark, yellows to reds, to oranges, to burnt siennas, to, and then eventually work my way up to purple, to the darks. I've got a little yellow ochre here. Um, let's see, I've got a little burnt sienna. So I'm going to go right to that. Working again, I'm going to work wet onto dry. And then what I'll do is if there's any hard edges, I'll immediately soften them. So I'm using some burnt sienna here. To start, he's got a nice reddish brown tone. You can see I'm not painting it heavy. I can certainly go back over that as I need to. Go right into some dark areas here. The fingers. Now again, up here, just take a wet brush and soften some of these areas here. To get a little mix. I want to take a little orange to be highlighted on the other side. I want to take a little purple for a little extra dark. Drop that in. Okay. Okay. You know, again, this isn't, I'm not doing a study on the human anatomy as so much as I'm suggesting the shapes. Because the size of the painting, and I'm not using super small brushes, I'm not worried about details as much as I am about shapes and creating the illusion of, oh, I know what that is. It's the eyes, it's the nose, it's the fingernails, it's just giving enough to suggest what I gotta suggest, right? Okay, let's get a little orange on the brush, soften this a little bit here, get a little more burnt sienna into the thumb under the fingers. That's what I'm doing here. And right into some purple. I mean, I can, yeah, you know, sepia, a real dark brown. I hate to use it on its own because it just, you know, with earth tones, boy, you got to watch them. They can just kill any painting just like that because they tend to flatten things out. But when you start experimenting and mixing stuff like burnt sienna with purple, it's just like, oh, wow, there's some rich darks there. I don't have to do this like I struggled in school. I can go off the script because that's what I can do. And now the shadows look interesting. Right? There we go. Okay. Yeah, looking at it on the screen, it's even more, as usual, on the screen, it's going to be more saturated than it is in person. That's how it is. Now I'm going to go ahead and drop in a burnt sienna on the face. I'm going to start in the dark areas. And the shadow under the cap and the hair, they'll blend in together. I kind of like when that happens. So I'll paint it all in with burnt sienna. The ear, the hair, shadow on the side of the face. Neck. His features start to make themselves more prominent. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to take, you know what, I'm going to take a little burnt sienna, a little purple up there. blocking in some of the ear, some of the side of the face. The eye. The nose a little bit. Just trying to block in some of the features rather quickly here. So the main features.
Tony, we do have the
Yes.
camera zoomed in pretty close, but would there be a way to move the reference photo so
Oh,
that we
yeah.
could
Sorry, forget
see
that
it,
guy.
see the face on there as well?
There.
And I can zoom out just a little bit, maybe to make
Okay.
that more possible.
Okay. There he is. Yeah, this is dry up here now. I can move this up a little bit. Okay. Go. Okay. Yeah, it's boy, you get into details and you just get lost. And you're like, well, where do you stop? Where do you stop? How do you know where to stop? When to stop? Well, you stop when you've said as much as you want to say. You stop when you sit back and you look at this and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna go get a sandwich. And you come back and you're like, boy, yeah, it's an intuitive process that develops over time. The more you paint, the more you pick up on that. But you get the more you paint, you go down the road of doing this, and it gets to hitting you like a ton of bricks. Like, yeah, you are done, and yet you'll still get that little voice that says, no, you want to finish that little piece. So what happens is then you bring your painting out into the real world. You have the spouse look at it. You have your dad look at it. You have your teacher from school look at it and start telling you things. You're like, okay, I get it. I gotta set my clock, my clock a little better for this kind of stuff. So, they say we artists are hermits. That's not true. We're getting feedback constantly from those people we trust, perfect strangers, somebody not familiar with our work. I mean, we all have our go-tos, and we go from there. What does it take for us to develop? Well, there's certain people we got to talk to, and there's certain kinds of feedback we have to get. That learning process. Okay. There's a little bit of red. Grab a little bit of, let's see, what red do I have here? I go and make these charts, and I'm always referring to them because I'm always changing the colors sometimes, and I forget. Yes, sir.
I noticed some of the shadows are going to build up, like on the shirts.
Yes.
Make it dark.
Yes, because
Right in the cap and side of the face, dark.
If we
Yeah.
can,
it's a little smaller area, and I want to get to that a little quicker. Not only because the time we have here.
sorry, could we repeat the question?
Well, he's asking about how, on the shirt, I suggest I talk about getting darker and darker and darker, and I'm spending more time building that up. Whereas with the face, I got to it much faster. The idea with that is that I have a little more control over that face. It's a smaller area, and I can do that. The shirt, I was messing around with the whites a lot more. I wasn't really sure with the shirt how dark I want to get it. Now that some of the water has evaporated, some of it gets a little bit lighter. And now that I have the face as dark as I want it, I can compare the two and go, yeah, I really want to get much more darker with the shirt. If you have just that little hint of doubt, just pull back. It doesn't. It seems like we're rushing through it because it's watercolor, but pick times where you can sit back a little bit and judge one area off the other. The face, I felt a little more confident that I could do that a little faster and get to that dark a little bit faster. Whereas the shirt, yeah, let's see. Because the shirt takes up a larger area. We'll see what happens when I paint the background in.
And someone online is asking, could you have painted the dark shadows first and then glaze on the lighter color?
No, the dark would have eaten up that light. I have to, again, like with the shirt, I have to build that up to see. Whereas in the face, I knew that I was going to be a little more dramatic. And see, it's lightening up already. I could even drop in more darks on there, but I'm going to move on here. And but generally, I do have to work light to dark, with the exception of sometimes when I'm lifting out color with a wet brush and I'm trying to get highlights or such. But no, it's very hard to put a light on top of a dark, because then you're fighting it, and then before you know it, you might get muddy. Okay, so what I'm going to do real quickly here is just block in a wood tone. So what I do is sometimes when I'm not sure exactly which color to do, I have multiple colors out here, and I'll just start kind of mixing, going, well, that looks like a light tan. I can take a little brown here, and I'll mix on the palette quite a bit before I go onto the paper. There we are. There we are. Sort of. I have an orangish tone to it. All right. Okay. Uh, you know, wood, just like rust, boy, how many watercolors go nuts on that kind of stuff because of the textures. And oh, I love the textures. And it's like, yeah, that could suck in all day working on that stuff. All right. I'm gonna jump to the blue cotton candy and then do the background, because then I'll have everything blocked in. And then it's like, yeah, then I can go to lunch, come back, or actually dinner, come back and pop out details as I want, so.
I'm coming with the mic, just a moment.
Young man in the front row with a question. Oh, we have a mic on you.
So my question is okay, so when you were painting that arm, you were talking about softening the edges of his like inner arm
Here?
against the shirt. No, the other arm. Where
Yeah.
you soften that brown edge
Yes,
when you put down the brown and then you're like, I'm gonna soften it out.
yes,
But you're not doing it in the face, like on that neck area.
yes.
Where that's a very hard edge. How do
Yeah.
you decide when you're gonna do a soft edge and when you're gonna do it?
Well, the hard edge, remember how do I decide with soft and hard edges? Remember, the hard edges are going to draw your attention that much more. You're starting to think about now center of focus. It's like, well, everything that starts to go away from, in this case, the center, there's going to be some softer edges. I don't want the treatment to be the same everywhere. I might, if I'm doing this as a real painting at home, I might go, yeah, we're going to get into some details in that face, and there's going to be a lot of high contrast and hard edges and a lot of stuff going on there, and I might downplay the arms. So that's more or less, where do you want the viewer to start, move the eye around, and finish. Most artists try to set that script. There are artists out there who don't worry about center of focus. They just, go at it. I've seen it. It's tough. We want you to start here and then finish here, and we want you to look at this and then that. We're trying to, tell the viewer kind of what to do. I'm gonna, let's see, I'm gonna go into the cotton candy up here. I got the blue. There we go. And back to wet onto wet. And once I have that blocked in, what am I using? Manganese blue, fan favorite, right? I'm gonna then blocking the background, it all just magically come together. So I was told how this works. Okay. Let's wet it first. Oh, but aren't you afraid of touching some of the pink? Yeah, well, that, can happen. I just have to take my time with it, right? If I have a lot, if it's too much, I'll just stop, and come back to, but I think I can do this fast enough. Okay. Down here too. Oh boy, there's a lot. Here. I think that's all of it. Great. Put this guy down. Let's go to long thin brush here. Got out plenty of manganese blue, and I'm going to drop in a lot of the blues here. Let me just put this right here so you can kind of see. Oh, careful. I want to paint fast because I want my soft edges. We're suggesting the colors and shapes of these guys without, boy, oh boy, there's tons of details to get into this if you want, but that can come later when things dry up and you can get in there with doing more of the crevices and the. Careful here. Okay.
Tony,
Then what I will do, yes. Hi,
Tony.
Dan.
Hi. I know you went to the American Academy of Art
I did.
and you studied with Irving Shapiro.
I did.
And I'm just wondering, how much of an influence did Shapiro have on your watercolor and you as an artist? Because his style is so different. I mean, he would start with for those who don't know, Shapiro started with a big 1-inch brush and
Yeah.
so did he have an influence on you, or did you start out that way, or?
Well, yeah, I started out that way. As a lot of kids coming out of school, you paint like your teacher, right? That's what you know. And I had to really, really kind of step back and kind of go, I don't want to paint like him. I don't want to paint like anybody, really. I mean, somebody will look at my work and say, well, it reminds me of so and so or so. That's okay. But I'm definitely not trying to emulate anybody. But what I keep in mind is what he said and his approach and the way he would block in from light to dark and how he'd use the bigger brush. And, I thought for a while when I was doing buildings and architectural landscapes and stuff, I'd start blocking in stuff like him and, with his earth tone palette and all that. And it's just like, but that's not, that's how I learned, but that's really not ultimately the way I want to paint. You as an artist, you find your way. You travel and you pull in, you soak in other experiences, and you keep those kernels of what, whoever it is that taught you. I don't care if it's mom or dad, you go, okay, those are the things that are the building blocks, and I want to start finding other things. He was all about, finding influences and the importance of influences were something he talked about, along with all the technique stuff. But So I use some of those things. I have some, I have a postcard of his, I keep in my studio and some other stuff, and I go, yeah, that's right. Something simple like, oh yeah, wait, I forgot to step back and squint. All these little things from back in the day. But in the meantime, it's like, yeah, I want to jump. We've seen plenty of other. We got plenty of friends that also studied under him. Man, they've just gone miles away from what he does. And then we've seen some people who paint just like him also. Uh, but that was a conscious choice though. After years of painting with cadmium red and going, you know what? I think they make other reds. I think they do. And I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to look for them. You just get so bogged down. You start to really, oh, I got to paint a shadow. Oh, where's my ultramarine blue and my sepia? That's my go-to shadow color, as it was for years. It's like, yeah, there's more than that. So, but it was a conscious choice. I saw that, and especially as I started doing portraiture, I'm like, okay, there's other things. He didn't do that, so there's other stuff I have to figure out. So I started looking at other artists, and I'm like, why do I like so and so so much? What is it specifically? So you really have to break it down as I drop in some shadow color here. I'm going to move to the background in a second.
Excuse me, Tony, someone's asking how long it took for you to develop your own style, moving away perhaps from your instructors.
Well, that's an ongoing process. Developing your own style is something that's intuitive, unless you're trying to copy somebody. People get hung up in, oh, what kind of style should I do? What do I want to not do? What do I want to be careful with? It's really an intuitive process. I think I've been painting like this for quite some time, with a few adjustments here and there. But I think early on, I look at my paintings from, like, say 20 years ago. I painted maybe a little bit quicker. I wasn't layering as much properly. I developed that over a number of years because I was looking for more. There were certain things I was looking for, and the way I was doing it wasn't getting there. I wasn't getting there. I was looking for like, if I was painting a vehicle, well, I want that to have a certain amount of volume, a certain amount of weight. How do I go about doing that? Well, there's lights, there's darks, there's certain areas that might be abstract. There's, without thinking, oh, I'm going to copy this from a photo. That's when then I started experimenting with more of my shadow colors. So yeah, it's a combination of choices you make. Okay. Before getting into any of those details, let's go ahead and do the dramatic background. And for that, I will use the flat brush. Now, we paint flat. Oh, those stands are great. Yeah, corners from some furniture we had delivered. Yeah. Is that the old guy thing? I'm saving everything. I got a garage full of wood, and I got styrofoam and weird sized boxes. Okay, well, let's be a little careful with that. Drive around the neighborhood. Virginia, my wife over here, we'll walk around the neighborhood. Garages are open. Oh, yeah, but the cars are never in the garages because they're filled with stuff. Like, oh, man. Okay, so here I'm going to stand up. Now it's time to put this over here. Now, here in the photo, I'm going to show this. It's pretty dark. There's some green over here. There's all this fence and stuff going on. I just want some dark going back there with a little bit of color. So I'm going to put this to the side. I like the green. I have some phthalo green I'm going to use, powerful stuff with lots of purple. So I'm going to, the brush is over here. And I'm going to do some wet onto wet, but not full coverage. There might be some whites here and there to kind of, that might create a little bit of movement that I like. Again, if I don't like them, paint over it. But now I make sure I've got enough purple here ready to go. We're out more fresh. I've got my phthalo green ready. I've got a little bit of oh yeah, Payne's gray. I didn't even talk about Payne's gray. I got some of that ready to go. Some sepia, some, I want 2 or 3 different darks to kind of give this some life. I'm going to indicate his pants just a little bit, but so I'm just going to start brushing this on. And when you stand up, now I can move around a little bit and see the reflection of the paper and where I have coverage and where I don't have coverage. This is where, when you do these backgrounds, when you do this kind of stuff like I'm doing, you can get this is like, hey, I can get experimental. I can use a Chinese brush, or I can use a squirrel mop, or I can, that's really the time to play around, because you're just creating shapes and you're moving fast, right? Hands. When I did use the particle board, the fiber board, it was cool because when I put the wet paper on there and stapled on there, it kind of buckled the board a little, so I could spin it around like a turntable. I have this big melamine table, which is real smooth, and that element was cool. But I don't know, you know. Okay, so I mean, this stuff where I started already drying, so this 1 inch, using a 1 inch flat brush here, I think it's giving me fast coverage, what I need. Again, I got my squirt bottle here I can use. My water's over there, so I don't put my brush in it. Done that before. And let's just start putting darks down here. That's not even nearly enough. Here I can even go over the face a little bit, because it's going to be, kind of blend in. I wanted it darker there anyway, right? Oh, it's going to use a lot. I mean, I could tell right when I drop it in if it's going to be dark enough, because it should be, this is when I go through a lot of paint. The flat brush, tell you, is more versatile than you would think, because of how you turn it, how you move it. For years, I was like, oh yeah, that's, blocking in large areas. I'm like, well, no, there's, you're using different size brushes too. I mean, I've got ones that are 2 inch, 3 inch, ½ inch.
Excuse me, Tony, can you talk a little bit more about your choice in the colors of the background and perhaps when you would change them, like in the painting where there was kind of green on one side and blue on the other,
And I'm still doing that, yes. yes.
or when you decide to change the color of the shirt of your subject?
Well, I start to look at contrasts. Now I'm thinking, I got colors down, so it's like, well, do I want stronger saturation and more value? Now that I've got full coverage here, I got to go, well, we need more contrast. Now I can drop in some of the phthalo green. On top. Purple. Boy, when you get to this stage, you got to paint it and like it, because I ain't changing nothing at this point. Get my sepia down over here. Usually, a lot of times with the dark, I like, mix in, maybe I'll mix in I will put in a sepia or something else that kind of changes it so you don't, look at it right away. Sometimes I like to look at a dark and have somebody go, they're not really sure exactly what's in there, what color that is. Because I know again, when this dries, it's going to lighten up, and but I don't want to have to think about going back over it yet again, because then it loses some of that freshness to it. Yeah. So I got to kind of, at this point, well, let's just go down here. Now I can kind of step back a little bit. I'm going to put my corners under here. First time I've stepped back from it. You see it different from even up there. It's darker there. I'll pick this up, and I know the people at home, but for you guys, real quick, you see what's happening there. Let me get back down here. What you have to do is I know I'm painting fast and talking even faster, and you do have to exhale. Because you get going on this thing, and pretty soon you're into it, right? You gotta step back in between steps and kind of go, oh, all right, look at it from the side, hold it into a mirror, look at it when it's switched around, look at it upside down. Heck, you could do a lot of the painting upside down. You should be able to, because at the end of the day, it's just shapes you're painting, right? So as certain things start to dry, you could pull away from it a little bit more, Barry.
I was just asking, does the in-person audience have any additional questions? I've got a few random things in the Q&A. Just a moment.
Hi.
Oh, hello.
So my question is that your subjects are very interesting and very unique. And I'm assuming that this is your livelihood, that you paint to make your livelihood. So can you categorize what kind of people buy your paintings?
No.
No. Okay. And
I would never guess the people who buy my paintings, no.
And also, do you find when you're taking pictures, do you think, oh, this one's going to sell?
No.
Never, right? Because you're doing
Never.
it because you're passionate.
Right,
Okay.
right. If I was to think, okay, what's going to sell? Gee, I know people like paintings of cows and pigs and those florals that, and oh yeah, those barns. Yeah, I start to think, well, what am I doing this for? That's what commissions are for. And I've done some of those. It's just like, okay, you switch gears a little bit, and you're going to the more bread and butter stuff of something that's gonna have an appeal or be, the family portrait or what have you. But this type of thing, it's taken me years to really accept that that's what I like to do. It's based on my travels. It's not me trying to find something else. I mean, you're always looking, you're always questioning yourself. But when I started, I mean, I got pictures from 40 years ago, from like when I went to New Orleans. I still look at them sometimes and go, you know what? There's something there. I mean, you always keep those old pictures. You just do, because you're seeing differently. You think, I think I have a painting I did, I don't know, 15 years ago. And I look at it now, I'm just like, wow, I would have done this, that, or something that I attempted and I just put away. And I know, and I knew 10, 15 years ago that this is something I think I like now and I'm gonna like more in the future. I'm just not sure what my approach is just yet. I need to do a little more of this and that before revisiting this. That happens quite a bit. Yeah, I'm tempted to always throw stuff away, clear out the drawers and kind of, be fresh with everything. But there's some photos that I have lost to time that I wish I still had. And so I try to, my old Canon AE1 days, I keep the negatives. I have negatives going way back. I mean, my father taught me part of that. Always keep your negatives. Always, or your slides. You just never know. Because your perception of things change over the years, and you might revisit something that makes more sense now. So, yeah, I don't know what your original question was. All of a sudden, I just
We do have a couple technique questions
Technique.
from our virtual audience. Do you ever use a projector to trace your subjects on the paper?
all the time. Next question. Yes, I have a digital projector, and what I do is basically, I have all my photos. I jump into Photoshop. By the way, I used to be a web designer, so I kind of working with Photoshop a lot more these days than I was in years past. But I do in Photoshop. I do most of my I answer all my compositional questions, and when I'm happy with that, I will then I have the main image. I put it onto a thumb drive, trap it into my digital projector, and throw it up onto the wall, and it's just much quicker that way. I'm not painting from life. I'm not out in the streets working on my sketchbook. I've done the hard work, I feel, by finding a subject worthy of painting, and I want it to look a certain way. And then after I'm done using the projector, I'll still do some drawing on there, highlight some details, erase a few lines, make some other changes. So it's an overlapping process that the projector is just another part of it. Back in the day before the projector, I had a Luciograph, whereas you put the drawing down below and it projects it up onto a light, and you put tracing paper on there and you trace that, and then you transfer the tracing onto the paper. And my wife remembers I had this we called it a Lucy. It was this giant thing with a hood, and it weighed a ton, and the light was so hot. And then Artograph came out with projectors that loaded from the top down, and I mean, you go all the way back to the old camera obscura days. There's all kinds of different tips and tricks to help you get the drawing onto the paper. But before any of that works, like back in school, you got to know how to draw. And I don't mean just with a graphite pencil. I mean, you got to know how to compose, think. Everything that's included in drawing is assembling something. The idea is you're translating your thoughts, your concepts onto a two-dimensional surface. And when you do that successfully, that means you can draw, you can plan, you can set up to do further work. But you're translating your concepts and your ideas onto a two-dimensional surface. That takes a lot of understanding of what it is you see, understanding perspective, understanding composition, all those things before you can make a successful painting.
Okay. And a couple people are asking,
Yes.
again, do you ever scratch things off to get those very tiny white lines? Or do you
R-
use masking fluid?
Yeah, rarely. I do use masking fluid, but rarely. It's a pain in the ass and it smells something awful. And sometimes it just gives me too much of the same hard edge all over. So but there's just times when I have to use it. There's no question. It's going to help me paint faster. Um, but I only use it in very light situations. Sometimes, gosh, I use it less and less nowadays, and I rarely scratch the paper for little highlights. I guess maybe rarely, I will say.
Okay. And there was one other technique question. Do you ever use a mister or sprayer on the background?
Well, yeah, my old squirt bottle here, and you know, boy, I was getting real anal about these things too, because like you got the pump, you got the trigger, you got some that just drip out, you got some that do a fine mist. Then now here what I can do, I can hit the background a little bit, and what it'll do is it'll create a little bit of a starburst effect, sort of like oil and water kind of thing going on. But I got to be careful as to not be too gimmicky with it. So what did we do way back in the day? It was like, okay, I'm gonna just take a lot of color and I'm gonna go, just a million ways to apply the paint, but you got to block it in first and have your core pieces in place for any of those other gimmicks. It might help, but they ain't gonna fix things, not too much.
Just a moment. I'm
Oh.
bringing the mic.
We got a mic.
So again, your
Yes.
wife is encouraging me to ask you
What?
this question again. Do you have an idea of the category of people who buy your paintings?
There's no category. There's
So are they
Art-
people who like
art
they're
lovers.
drawn to that ethnicity or?
No.
Well, then
no.
I don't know why she's egging me on to get this question answered from you.
Because people who I've talked to directly who have bought my work in the past
Yeah.
as a random disparate group of people. They'll be like, oh, that reminded me of something. Oh, look at the soulful eyes. Oh, they're just people from all over. There's no categorizing them. Because if there was, I'd be emailing them big time. I'd be all over the socials going, hey, folks, here you go. This is just for you. Yeah, 40 years, haven't figured that part out yet. So, yeah, no.
Any other questions? Someone online was asking approximately how long does it take you to complete a painting?
I was waiting for that one. Wow. Yeah. What's my quick, easy response? A week to 2 weeks for most of my paintings. If I'm sitting at it 8 hours a day, going at it, I can knock these out. But I'm a little slower than that. I will say there is one time there was a painting I had in mind. It was actually The Liar and the Truth guy. It was a side profile and there was graffiti behind him. And I had the whole thing pictured in my head exactly how I wanted it, which was really rare. I mean, I had every inch of this thing in my head. Sunday, I drew it out. I composed it. I drew it out. And by Thursday, the thing was done. And I was just like, yes. And that, I think I screwed up something on the hand, but I won't say what it was, but it was, hey, it's sold. So, does it really matter? But that was an instance where I worked every day and I just, everything was, I was in the groove with the whole thing. That was the rare instance where it's just like from start to finish. I was started Sunday, finished Thursday. I knew how many hours each day I was putting in on this thing, and I knew exactly what was what. I think most artists can only have a couple of those in their life where it was just.
So where would you So where would you say you are with this painting in your process? Are there more details to come? How much more time would you necessarily spend on this one?
The only other thing I would do right now is I might put, and I'll do it right now. Now that I have everything blocked in and I squint at this and kind of go, oh yeah, I could punch up a couple more details in the cotton candy or work with a few more darks. One thing I want to do though is a little more, as I have all these colors kind of blending on my palette here. I squint at this and go, and I'll take my flat brush and go, I want more dark coming through the shirt. For fun, because there's just no stopping the process when you're, I'm gonna throw an orange on the other side of the shirt. Sometimes I say it's neat when you can put what I call an unexpected hit of color or an expected hit of color in an unexpected place. Something that doesn't look like it belongs there at all, but yet it creates movement and creates, your eye looks at it and goes, okay, I'm not sure what that is. I can figure out the rest of this painting, but it helps with eye movement and it might give it a little quality of like what I would call a contemporary quality. I will say it's a high risk, high reward kind of a move. It's like, wait, did somebody throw some paint on there? Is that a meteor? Is it a bird? What's going on there? But sometimes you like to do that in the painting, just to break it up a little high contrast, like a hit of that phthalo blue just in a little area to set people back. So now now I can look at this and go, well, yes, I can put some more warm tones in the face, and I can bring out a little bit more of the structure and such. But that's essentially, this kind of gives me everything I want, and I can look at this and go, you know what, I really enjoy doing this, and it gives me mostly what I want. I think it could be a successful finished painting, and I can use this as a springboard to do a finished painting now.
Yeah. Can you talk about, I'll ask the question while I'm coming with the mic.
Sure.
Can you talk about your decision making in doing an incredibly detailed face, like let's say with the little girl versus this one is a less detailed face, or the gentleman with the cart in, I believe his name
Oh, the
Nairobi
push
or
cart
something like
man.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how you make those decisions.
A lot of times those decisions will start with the photo, and I look at it and go, well, what's attracting me to this? Is it the eyes? Is it more features in the hair? I mean, it really is those features. But if it's a full figure and maybe there's something else, like with him, he's carrying this cotton candy. I'm like, okay, well, it's not going to be just about his face and everything else is going to be blurred out. So I consider that a compositional question. Yes.
So did you say you started with 140-pound weight because it would be quicker drying, and then you do the finished piece and 300?
I would do that, yes.
And the reason, the
Well,
difference?
the multiple reasons. One is expense. 300-pound paper is quite expensive, and so I'm not going to be doing a lot of testing on that. Except if maybe what I do sometimes, if I buy new paints and I want to see how they look on the paper that I paint on, I'll do that. I'll do some testing on actual 300-pound, like a scrap. Like, I always have scraps of paper ready to kind of just test. But working on the 140-pound paper does, in a way, I mean, for this purpose, forces me to paint faster. Forces me to not just overthink every decision. It's get to the meat of the matter, the meat and potatoes, if you will. And then when I'm ready to sit down and, have my root beer over here, my cigar over here, and go, okay, I'm going to spend some time on this. then I got the expensive equipment out and I'm ready to go. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.